Hello and welcome to the Irish NFL Show, a preview of Week 4 Sunday action. My name is Shane Brennan, and seeing that Connor is away, it is a next man up game, and I'll be your host this evening alongside the terrible twosome of Brian O'Leary and Noel Downing. Welcome into the show tonight. Thanks to everyone who is joining us live on X, YouTube, and on our Twitch feeds, and to everybody who's listening to us in podcast form from Friday morning onwards. We are thankful as always for your support and hope that if you like what you hear, you'll tell a friend because it really does go a long way. Tonight we are breaking down 13 Sunday games, 8 games in the early window from 6 p.m. and 4 in the 9 o'clock window before we hit Sunday Night Football with a big AFC clash between the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills, who look to maintain their unbeaten run. Worth remembering, folks, that if you're listening to us on Thursday, that our Thursday Night Football podcast with Brian and Kieran O'Donovan, which previews the big NFC East clash tonight between the Giants and the Cowboys, is available across all of our podcast platforms. But tonight, guys, we're going to forget about the NFC and crack straight into a team that really needs something to change. Because when I was doing my notes for last week's show, I was sitting out in the back garden. It was a beautiful sunny day. I had a bottle of Spanish beer in my hand. And today, the rain is beltering down. It feels truly like winter. It reminds people of how quickly things can change in the space of a week. And in the NFL, that was the case with the Carolina Panthers last week, how they benched Bryce Young, brought in the Red Rifle. A whole new lease of life came into that organization, and they're facing against the Cincinnati Bengals team, who are in dire need of a win after starting 0-3, despite the fact that they are a team who really should be pushing for AFC Championship or Super Bowl contention. So, Brian, when you look at this matchup here, the Bengals are coming in as favorites, but the Panthers proved last week that they can be a banana skin when they want to be.
Yeah, I know we touched on Monday show that we probably should have saw that coming last Sunday. I was a bit disappointed with myself because we've seen in the past with Andy Dalton, when he gets an opportunity to step in, he does a good enough job. And yet last week, he certainly went in and there was little expectation. And let's be fair, the offense was transformed in that game. But we have seen this in the past where teams need a kickstart for a season, and they navigate it away by bringing in a quarterback with great experience. Obviously, would know Andy Dalton well from his Bears day, QB1, as they called him before Justin Fields got his hands on the role. He'll probably put up another stellar performance on Sunday, and they'll go and beat the Bengals team that right now are really struggling. They're 0-3. If they could go 0-4, they're 0-3 for the first time since 2019, Shane, and that kind of reflects on where they are. They're slow starters, but they tend to get things going. And we saw last year they got it going, but ultimately it didn't really come to pass because the Joe Burrow injury. They've got to have this one Sunday. Like this for me is we're getting into serious conversations around coaching staff scenarios with Zach Taylor if they were to go and lose this game. I'm not comfortable with the selection. I will go Bengals. I think the Bengals. This is the last chance to lose. Like I got a text from a Bengals fan the other day who suggested they could still win the division. Not for me, bearing in mind they're already 3 games behind the Steelers, and we're not even talking about a Ravens team either. That looked like they could potentially get things going after their big win in Dallas last weekend. The Bengals, for me, will win. I don't think it'll be a nice game. I don't even think they'll even cover the spread, which I believe is 4 to 5 points. I think this could come down to an 8 field goal, and I think McPherson will kick a winner. It's a Bengals win, but doesn't fill me with much joy or satisfaction, from where we thought they'd be. We thought they'd be going in here and knocking the stuffing out of these type of teams.
Yeah, just on that note, we look back at the Bengals in particular, and the fact that the 3 games they've played so far have been 1-score games, pretty much. They were 6 points down against the Patriots. They only lost to the Chiefs by a point. That game against the Commanders last week ended up being 5 points in the difference. When you leave so many close games, especially considering that 2 of those 3 opponents were teams that you think the Bengals should really be beating from this right from the start. What is it about Cincinnati where they just can't seem to get a control in situations, particularly when it comes to at the start of the game? We've talked so much about how in the start of the season it's generally been very slow in the Joe Burrow era. But even with some of these games, I'm just trying to getting a sense on the defensive side of the ball, in terms of offenses, in terms of how to get the run game going, that they just don't seem to plan well enough for games to start as they mean to go on.
Yeah, it's been, look, you can look at the Kansas City game and you can say, fair enough, you lose 26-25 to the Kansas City Chiefs. That's fair. They are the Super Bowl champions. But the other 2 games, the New England game obviously finishes 16-10, and it's that 1 score, and we kind of write it off to, look, they, as Brian mentioned, they start kind of slow, and that's the Bengals, and that's the way it goes. Then when they finally get the offense going against the Commanders, their defense gives up a load of points, and they lose that one. And I don't know why it is. I mean, I'd say we can write it off to slow starters, but what Brian said is absolutely spot on. They're in a very tough division, and already they find themselves 0-3. They're lucky the Ravens maybe haven't got the results we might have thought they would have got, so they're within touching distance there, and who knows what you'll get from the Browns. But the Steelers have that 3-game lead, and you know, this is it. They cannot start 0-4. The percentage of them doing what they want to do in the season, if they start in that division 0-4, is very, very small. So it really is a crunch game already in the first month of the season for the Bengals. And in terms of the Panthers, I'm with Brian here. I'm going for the Bengals, but I'm a bit kind of hesitant on it because I just don't know what I'm going to get from them. We look at the Panthers; they go in last week. They've nothing to lose. They swap out the quarterback, and Andy Dalton comes in and does what an experienced veteran quarterback does. I know we talked during the off season how the Panthers had they'd put pieces in place to maybe get the best out of Bryce Young in terms of Deontay Johnson at wide receiver. They upgraded the O-line. For whatever reason, it didn't work with Young. But Dalton is a good veteran player who can use those talents that have been put in there with him. So it'll be interesting to see now. Was last week just that, that little burst you get when you bring in a new quarterback, or was it the sign that maybe the Panthers have some pieces they can win a few games with more than we thought, and the Bengals just need to switch it on because they could find themselves adrift very, very quickly, and that could be the season done for a team who have aspirations of playoffs and potentially further than that.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. When I'm looking at this game, I think I'm picking the Bengals because before the season started, I picked them to win in the Super Bowl. And I'm always hoping that they win it because, as you were saying, no, this is their season. And I know it's not even October, and it seems like it's very early for us to be saying that. But come on, if the Bengals don't win this one, it really is their season. I think that's the reason why they will have a good chance of beating the Panthers here. Despite the fact that the Panthers, so far this season, has actually given up the fewest amount of quarterback pressures and quarterback hits. Their offensive line is obviously decent enough. And that's somewhere where Bengals have generally been quite bad. But I think last week, the Panthers were maybe taken for granted by Las Vegas. I don't think they'll be taken for granted by Cincinnati this week. That's why I think the Bengals will win. Moving on now to the New York Jets. And it's funny, actually, when we were talking about before the season started about the way that the Jets season was shaping up, we were saying, oh, well, their schedule seems pretty bad. This week is actually probably one time where it kind of falls in their favor. They have a home game against the Denver Broncos after getting an extra 3 days rest from a shellacking of the New England Patriots on Thursday Night Football last week. But they're playing against a Broncos team that really is coming with a lot of confidence. They played at 6 o'clock last week as well. Bo Nix seemed to wasn't overused. I was chatting to Colin during the week, and he sort of gave the point of view that the Broncos actually find a way to use Bo Nix in a way where he wasn't trying to force him to do stuff he can't do. And all of a sudden, the Broncos come out and deliver a pretty strong beating of a Buccaneers team, which I think was rightly considered hot favorites in that game. So when I'm looking at this matchup now between the Jets and the Broncos, I'm really not quite sure where the difference makers are going to be. I think this has a chance to be a close game. One thing is interesting, though, is the fact that Aaron Rodgers in that game against the Patriots had 8 different passing targets who caught passes and got a decent chunk of yards. It's quite clear he's not hedging all his bets on one wide receiver or on one offensive target. When you look at the way that Denver's defense generally sets up, their plan is pretty much put Patrick Surtain on what WR1. That's what they did against Tampa Bay to keep Evans out of it. Surtain only faced one target in that game. They didn't even throw the ball in his direction in Tampa Bay last week. So I'm just wondering now, when you're looking at where he fits into that puzzle, does that, will Denver's defense be able to shape up for this game in the way that they were against Tampa Bay? I don't think so. I think that considering it's a home game, the Jets know that they need this victory before they head off to London next weekend. They play against the Vikings, a game I'm looking forward to seeing. I just think that Aaron Rodgers is really getting into a flow. He's getting into his stride. With every game he plays, his average yards goes up. The way the quality of play goes up. He's now thrown for 5 touchdowns with just 1 interception so far this year. Fair enough that he seems to take a decent amount of sacks, and the Denver defense may be able to get a few sacks on him. We're not quite sure what way he'll bounce back from so many quarterback hits, but I think it's too early in the season for Aaron Rodgers to start feeling a bit withered. So for me, when I'm looking at this game, I think the Jets have a good chance of winning this one. Might need to, it might be close going into the fourth quarter, but I don't know. I'm just not fully confident that Denver after pulling off such a great performance in Tampa Bay last week, can repeat the trick. No, what do you think?
Well, I'm with you in terms of the team that wins. I think the Jets will win this. I think they have some. Look, they've some really good options there. Obviously, we've Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams. I think Alan Lazard has shown that himself and Rodgers have a great kind of tandem going on. And even if he doesn't get the most yards, he's always there or thereabouts for a touchdown. I just think this Jets team is too strong. Last week we talked about the Broncos, and obviously at that point they hadn't been having a good season. I was very critical of Sean Payton and how he was treating Bo Nix and how they weren't doing the right things with that young quarterback to give him a chance. They obviously looked at it. Obviously, Sean Payton is a quarterback guru. He gets there in the end. So last week they were able to make adjustments and use him a lot better, and he was very, very productive on the ground. He got his touchdown and a few yards, and he didn't turn the ball over, which is really important for a young quarterback like that. But I think at the end of the day, I think this Jets team has too much strength. I do think they'll beat the Broncos. I don't know where it's going to be like this for a number of teams from last week. I saw so many things last week I didn't see coming, that I don't really know this week what these teams are going to do, who they really are. We need to see a bigger sample size, and the Broncos are one of those teams. I had them pegged as not Panthers bad, but bad. Then last week they have a blowout of a team that you really thought would beat them, and it's just who are these Broncos? So this week I don't have enough trust in them yet to say they can beat the Jets, but it will be interesting to see how this game goes and the next couple of weeks, if this Bo Nix kind of turnaround is something that will continue to happen, or if it's just been one of those weeks where everything was just crazy in the NFL.
Craziness is often the order of the day in the NFL. So, Brian, do you think that the Broncos can come into this with a victory?
No, I don't. I think last week's game is one of those games in the reflection of a season, or even when we hit the halfway point, that we'll look back and say that's one of those anomalies that we didn't expect coming, just like the Panthers going into Vegas last weekend. The Jets are rolling, albeit it's 2 wins, but it's more the magnitude of how well Aaron Rodgers is playing. I think they keep on rolling into London with another victory. I think it's a comprehensive one. On Sunday, I think Breece Hall will have a day itself running the ball against what's been arguably a weak rush defense over the course of the last 18 months, and it's improved slightly this year, but not at the level on Sunday for them to stop the Jets and withstand this. So Jets victory for me.
Moving on now to a matchup in the AFC South, and I remember last year, I think it was roughly around the Thanksgiving time, and there was a matchup between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Houston Texans in Houston. And I said, okay, this was whatever week that was on. I thought it was the biggest match of that week, because whoever won that game would come out and top the division. The Jazz came in and won that game. They ended up collapsing in the tail end of the season. Houston came in, won the AFC South, and moved on. And now we're coming into another matchup between these two teams where both sides are coming off pretty heavy defeats. The Jags getting embarrassed by the Bills in Monday Night Football, and the Texans getting beaten down quite badly by a Minnesota Vikings team, which they were expected to at least keep things close to. So, Brian, when you're looking at this matchup of the two AFC South, well, actually not Titans. The Titans are another team in the AFC South. What way do you see this going?
It's tough to clash with the Titans anyway, that's for sure, Shane, which we would have probably expected at the start of the season. I mean, I was reflecting on, like, it's been a real bad week. Every week we see teams who are getting grilled, on their local media. And obviously Kieran is quite close when he's not here this evening, but he was putting up certain snippets this week. It was wildfire in Jacksonville on Tuesday. I mean, the first game of the season they should have won against the Dolphins on the road. Their offense kind of let them down. The defense kind of held up their end of the bargain in terms of slowing Tua down for large parts of the game. Week 2, it was the opposite to a certain extent. Their offense didn't play well, but their defense allowed a 6-minute drive at the end of the game to essentially give the Browns the victory. And last Monday night, they ran into a buzzsaw in Buffalo. Like, this Buffalo team right now are on a mission, we could say, and they've obviously got a bigger challenge ahead on Sunday Night Football against the Ravens. But nothing went right on Monday for them offensively, defensively. It was a terrible situation. There's some of the visuals of Trevor Lawrence spinning around, expecting players to be coming at him. That's because right now there's an offensive line that is completely struggling. Cam Robinson not playing well. Brandon Scherf is completely off his game. They've struggled over the course of the 3 weeks, and is it any wonder he's not playing at the level that the contract people would expect? But he's not getting very little protection back there. And we spoke time and time again. Doesn't matter what quarterback you have back there. If your offensive line is not holding up properly throughout the course of the game, you're never going to get anywhere. And this game, probably doesn't suit them that the Texans have lost, because I'm not going to say the Texans would have got ahead of themselves if they had a win into Minnesota, but they kind of got a lesson to them given to them last week. They went in. Many people said the Vikings aren't at the level, but the Vikings showed them up considerably last week. I think the Texans have to come back and make a point. And the fact that it's a divisional game, and we've seen year in, year out where these teams tend to win on the road, then go down to the opposite ground and win. Not for me this week. I think the Texans are going to, heap more pressure on the head coach. And right now, it looks like Balky and Peterson are not on the same page. It looks like he's brought in players with expectation of player development. It's not materializing. I think the only step for me now is a new coach that can potentially fix Trevor Lawrence because he looks completely off. And for me, it's another week in which they're going to struggle and they're going to find themselves 0-4, and the Texans will just keep moving in the right direction. Texans for me.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation in Jacksonville, considering that this is now 8 games in a row that Trevor Lawrence has lost as a starter after that quite strong beating in Buffalo. But the big thing for me is the fact that after the game finished, in the press conferences or in the way that Trevor Lawrence and a few of the players were talking, you never got the sense that they really had to fight, that they really felt embarrassed by losing to Buffalo. I think it was just a case of, we'll just kind of move on to the next thing. And then you're kind of wondering if there's something kind of deeper going on within the organization itself. And that's, you have to look at head coaching, even the fact you start questioning as to whether they will continue for the rest of the season, because the ownership in Jacksonville have made it very clear that they believe this is the best team to ever be assembled in that city. And in terms of talent-wise, and certainly in terms of the amount of money they're spending, they're probably not far off, but they're not being utilized correctly. In particular, when it comes to the performance of Trevor Lawrence, I don't think he's lacking in skill. There's something mentally there which is not going right, and I don't know if he's just happy in that setup. So when I look at this matchup here against the Texans, sure, the Texans were pretty badly beat down by the Vikings last week, but the big part of that was, it was in Minnesota, and that loud crowd was like a college game, but a college game being played inside a dome. It's very difficult to run an offense in that kind of environment. But B, the Brian Flores system put CJ Stroud through a meat grinder, and even though he managed to, still get around seven yards per throw, Stephon Diggs still managed to be a pretty good target. They couldn't get anything done because the defense got right at them. Whereas if you look at what the Jacksonville defense has done in the last couple of games, they've gotten very few sacks. They got absolutely 0 against the Bills compared to the 4 sacks and 9 QB hits that their offensive line let on Trevor Lawrence. And there's a key difference at the line of scrimmage, the level of physicality which is there in Houston, which isn't there in Jacksonville. So everything here points to a Houston victory, and a Houston victory that's pretty strong. The fact that Quinbet have the Texans as 7-point favorites, I think, is a pretty fair reflection of the fact that Houston have every right to feel favorites here. I think the fact that there's a bit of a juggernaut going on in Minnesota that the Texans kind of fell foul to. I don't think there's anything structurally wrong or organizationally wrong with how they are playing. That was just one of those any given Sunday type moments, maybe, or they were facing against an unstoppable machine in Minnesota. The Jacksonville Jaguars are absolutely nothing of the sort. And look, we said this about the Panthers. I'm not completely draining hope from Jags fans that against a team which they're more comfortable with and more familiar with, they may be able to refine some of that form that Trevor Lawrence has lost. But I really can't see it happening here. I think DeMeco Ryans will have a pretty good game plan. And I don't think Doug Peterson has enough in the dressing room to really grind out something from this Jacksonville team. No, what's your pick?
I think the worst thing to happen to the Jacksonville Jaguars was the Texans result last week. I think the Texans are going to come in and be way, way too strong for the Jaguars, and I think the Texans take that.
Very good. Well, we're going to move on now to the Route 66 derby between the Los Angeles Rams and the Chicago Bears. Pretty interesting matchup here. The Bears, oddly, are 3-point favorites in this, which I find kind of unusual considering the nature of the Rams' comeback last week and the fact the Bears are probably looking a little bit shakier than we thought, considering the hype for Caleb Williams at the start. No, you're a resident Chicagoland expert. How do you see this game going?
Yeah, we'll start with the Rams first. And yeah, what a great result last week, given the way, the players that they had missing and how they were down and the way they fought back to win that game against the 49ers, who, whilst have their own injuries and are, haven't been looking the best this season, still have so many talented players there. That was such a fantastic result for the Rams. I think looking at the Bears, Look, defense is fine. You don't need to worry about the defense with the Bears. As per usual, it's the offense causing all these problems. I mean, last week they have Caleb Williams throwing the ball 52 times, which is just ridiculous. That run game has absolutely stopped in its tracks. And that's just a big problem for this Bears team. There's a lot of questions about Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator, in terms of scheme and plays he's calling. And there is a lot on offense for the Bears to fix. Looking at the Rams, I can understand to a point why the Bears are favourites. You look at last week's game, can these players do that again? Obviously Matthew Stafford is a top quarterback, but he is missing a lot of targets. 2 main targets are gone, which is a lot for a team. And I think maybe you put faith in the Bears defense to be able to hold them to enough. But my question is, can the Bears offense do enough to get those points? I don't worry about the defense. I always worry about, can the offense get enough points just to drag them over the line? And I really don't know. I know we have our predictions. I've changed this game 3 times on that sheet so far because I actually don't know which way it's going to go. I think I'm going to go Bears in the end. I think there's a lot of pressure building up in Chicago now on Shane Waldron, and there was a point where Caleb Williams came off the pitch and basically said, what are we calling here in these plays? So I think Matt Eberflus even said that there were certain things they cannot do again, which was kind of seen as a veiled shout to Waldron to, get it sorted. We all know about that goal line play on 4th down where DeAndre Swift goes 12 yards backwards because of the option, while 4 offensive linemen are lying on the ground. So I think the Bears will take a big look at themselves this weekend. I think they will make changes on offense. I think because of the Rams' injuries, and I do like Caleb Williams. I know that the results haven't gone their way, but the more I watch him, the more I'm convinced that if they can get it right on the offensive line, he can make the plays. So I'm holding out hope. I'm giving them the home field advantage that this week they'll be better and the defense will do their job and the offense will do just enough against a depleted Rams team to get the win. We'll cross the fingers and we'll go for that.
Yeah, just when I look at this one here, fair. I understand all the points regarding the Bears offense, and look at Dave home field advantage, and the fact when I look at LA, I think the fact that Matt Stafford managed to still get over 220 yards on a touchdown and lead a comeback when they were 14 points down twice and 10 points down late in the 4th quarter, despite the fact that they're missing Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, I think shows the value of organization. And when we look at the difference between Caleb Williams' expectations and Caleb Williams' delivery, or even we look at the way Justin Fields is playing in Pittsburgh and Justin Fields is playing in Chicago, the difference there is not in skill, not in judgment, but it's just in the value of good organization that have invested in the right parts of the field. And in that, I trust now that Sean McVay, after getting that victory, will be able to spur the Rams onto a little bit of a run. Fair enough, they got absolutely hammered by the Cardinals a couple of weeks ago, and they looked very bad against the 49ers in SoFi Stadium last week. But we've seen this before with Sean McVay. Just give them a bit of hope, give him a reason to inspire hope in his guys, and I think he can build some better performances. Now, in saying that, an area where I think Chicago can really win isn't on the line of scrimmage. I think it's their goal line defense. They've shown that in the last couple of games, particularly with that big interception and a couple of big plays against the Colts last week. They are a really good example of that bend don't break mentality. Once you get, the closer you get to the goal line, the tougher it is to break down that Chicago defense. So I think the Rams are going to need to come up with some of their best stuff, or maybe even get lucky with a long touchdown that comes from 30, 40 yards out instead of waiting until they get into the red zone to try and strike. Because if they rely on the run game with Kyren Williams, are they going to get too far? I'm not 100% sure. Saying that, I think this is going to be a very close game. I understand why Bears are favorite, but I think Matt Stafford coming into a field he's familiar with from his time in the NFC North, I think the Rams might eke a close one here.
I would side with Noel in the sense that it's probably one of the toughest games of the weekend to pick. Genuinely gone back and forth. Like similar, I flipped the sheet a couple of times. Matthew Stafford needs 223 yards on Sunday to surpass Eli Manning in the top 10 and move to the top 10 of quarterbacks for all-time passing yards. He's going to do it in a very familiar ground, as you said, in Soldier Field from his days with the Lions. And it strikes me as that kind of feel-good factor that helps him and it helps this Rams team get over the line in a tight game. I just think he's got the experience of a quarterback who's playing really well right now. Week 1, week 3, he's played really well. Come back last week. I think they're buoyed by that. I think they'll find a way to navigate a victory, but I think it'll be a very tight game.
Well, that brings us to the end of our first segment, which came thanks to Root Point, which demonstrates the value of global PR and comms to your business. We're going to take a very quick break here, but come back in about 30 seconds' time as we continue our preview of Week 4. Welcome back into the Irish NFL Show's preview of Week 4. That break there you saw, Buskers on the Ball, which is a fantastic place to watch NFL football every Sunday. Red Zone, selection of games in the Tampa Bar area. €6 points all day Sunday. What's not to like? This next segment here of our preview comes thanks to QuinnBet. And our first game that we're going to touch on is the battle in the NFC North between the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers. Is this maybe a case of a unstoppable force meeting an immovable object? Sam Darnold has really lit up the league and has been a fantastic underdog story for the Vikings team, which, as I mentioned earlier, gave a pretty bad beating to the Texans last week. Plays against a Packers team who I think have really relied on their defense in the absence of Jordan Love, who played excellently against the Titans and the Colts in the last couple of weeks. But, you know, which of these is going to budge first, Brian?
Well, look, first of all, there's a lot of speculation tonight that Jordan Love may not be playing, which is I found a little bit surprising because I looked from all the footage this week that he seemed to be on the right track, but maybe this is one of those situations. Let's not declare a hand too soon. Let's have the Vikings having to prepare for two scenarios. I was looking at the numbers. Jordan Love threw 34 times in the game in Brazil on week 1, which is not a surprise. They're, expansive offense. They've got all the players there, young wide receivers. And then in the 2 games thereafter, Malik Willis threw 34 times over the course of 2 games, which basically leads back to what Connor said, which is that LaFleur is a fantastic head coach. He knows ways to navigate victories. He knows ways how to navigate and perform for the quarterback, which essentially is, let's have our run game, try to do as dominate as best we can. Then that leads to him breaking free. And we saw over the course of 2 weeks how he was able to kind of get out and use them on the perimeter. And it's not the Jordan Love style of offense, and I imagine if he plays on something, they revert back to what we're used to seeing, which is a team that has a lot of players available. I was looking at some of the numbers. You referred to Stephon Diggs earlier. Stephon Diggs is averaging 8 yards per carry, 8 yards per reception, since he went to the Texans. All 3 wide receivers of the Packers are averaging 16 yards per reception. It just goes to show the magnitude of the players they've got available. You throw in Luke Musgrave, who's had a quiet start to the season. And they're going to go up against a Vikings team, and particularly the defense with Brian Flores. I'm torn because of the Jordan Love factor. We really need to see who's going to play on Sunday. If it's Malik Willis, I would think the Vikings will find a way to slow him down and ultimately come out on top. But I think it's smoking daggers. I think Jordan Love plays, and I think Jordan Love comes back and again sets an expectation for a team that right now I genuinely believe are primed for a huge run at the Super Bowl. I touched them to go to the championship game. I felt the 49ers would have them come that time of year. But bearing in mind they're 2-1, they probably could have won that Brazil game. And they've been playing with a quarterback that only 3 or 4 weeks ago was third choice at the Titans as opposed to even the backup. And they've navigated 2 victories before their even starting quarterback comes back. It's a huge game. Like in the magnitude of where this division is going, it's a massive game. But I think the undefeated Vikings come crashing down on Sunday. I'm going to go with the Packers.
Yeah, I think you make a good point regarding the record that we're looking at with the Packers. Yes, they're 2-1, but I'm not really sure how much weight we should put into the loss that they had at the start in Brazil against the Eagles. So considering that the unique nature of that game, considering it was week 1, which is a very unusual time to have an international game, and considering the field it was played on, because once you get somewhere where they're comfortable, this Packers offense is particularly potent. But when you look at what their defense are pretty good at, they managed to shut down the running game pretty strongly. And considering that Aaron Jones is still a very big part of how the Vikings attack this, Noel, do you think that, which defense do you think will be able to come up strong? Because, when I'm looking at this matchup here is the NFC North. physical football will make the key difference in what is probably going to be a close game between two very closely matched teams. So, who do you see really making the difference here?
I think this is actually going to be a fascinating matchup, and it's one of the games of the weekend I'm really looking forward to. I think Brian hit the nail on the head when he talked about the Green Bay Packers quarterback, if it's going to be Jordan Love or Malik Willis. I think if it's Malik Willis, he's had such a fantastic season, but you obviously would worry for a younger player like that going up against this Brian Flores defense, as he showed last week against someone like CJ Stroud, who is a top player. They really rattled him and got to him. Obviously, Grenard came up with three sacks, and there was a couple of other sacks in there. I think this defense can knock anybody off their rhythm. And if they're going up against Malik Willis, who has had a fantastic season, you can't take anything away from him. I just find that might be a step too far. But then Brian talked about LaFleur and how he can scheme up things for no matter who's at quarterback, he knows how to put them in the right position to win games. I just think this Vikings team might be a little bit too strong. Again, this Packers team as well has targets and top players all the way through it. But just for me, there's something about this Vikings team. The only thing that worried me about them going into the season was Sam Darnold. I know we talked about it a bit, and I was really impressed. Obviously, look, they're the best wide receiver in football there who can help anyone out. That defense is phenomenal. But looking at this team, I just always felt that maybe the quarterback was going to hold them back, and that's why they might have 7 or 8 wins in this tough division. Well, it turns out Sam Darnold may have found his home. He finally, after bouncing around and having all this potential, he may now have found somewhere that he is able to fit in, where he just fits in and everything around him is right. And I just think this Vikings team is a little too strong, and I think they will have enough to beat this Packers team, but it'll be close and it'll be a good game because they are two really, really good teams in the NFC North. And if the Packers win, I wouldn't be surprised. But I just think the Vikings might be that little bit too strong.
Breaking news: Bears fans predicts Packers lose, which is always an interesting
Shocking,
angle,
isn't it?
But look, I think a lot of what you said there is very true, just in terms of the nature of the Vikings defense, the fact that they really can knock anybody off the rhythm. But I think that the same can be said for the way the Green Bay Packers play, and considering that the Vikings are really coming into a very strong rhythm, somebody has to knock them off at some point. Why not be a team which really looks to be bound to go far in the playoffs? I think they're in a really good setup. I'm expecting the Packers to win this. I think it's going to be a bit of a shootout in the first half, though. I don't think any side is going to go down lightly. Moving on now to a battle in the AFC between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Indianapolis Colts, which of course is accompanied this week by the Steelers watch party in Croke Park. I will be there. If anybody's there, please feel free to say hello. Come up to me. I'm the one. I'll be with my dad, who has a Tom Selleck mustache, so I don't know which is more, which probably comes out more, his mustache or my big head. But in terms of this game here, I mean, I think this is the third week in a row we've been talking about the Steelers game where they've been favorites, but they've been favorites by a point or a point and a half or 2 points. So this is the nature of the way they are playing. You're almost betting every time their defense managed to keep things low scoring because you're not quite sure how much their offense can dial up. That said, they've only conceded 26 points, I think, so far this season over the course of the first 3 games. And against the Chargers last week, I think Justin Fields built into that nicely. He managed to get 7.7 yards per attempt. He found a new throwing friend in Calvin Austin when Pratt Freiermuth is played out of the game by the Chargers defense. There's a lot to like about the Steelers. Now, will the curse of having an Irish watch party come to bite them again? It certainly did last year when they played against the Browns in the game we watched in Croke Park. I'd be interested to see that. But in terms of what's happening on the field against Indianapolis, I think one of the key differences is when you look at what Indy are showing up. Fair enough, they have a very strong run game. Jonathan Taylor has already had the last 2 games, has run for over 100 yards, gotten a few touchdowns in there. He's quite clearly their strong point. What I'm worried about is Anthony Richardson from a Colts point of view. And I know I'm a person who is very high in his ability. I think we saw that in the first game against the Texans. It's quite clear what Anthony Richardson is capable of. The problem is he's also quite capable of throwing interceptions. And against this Pittsburgh defense, when he's going to get hit a lot, when he's going to get pressured a lot, when that half-second difference in the pocket is going to make him do or sort of complete decisions quicker than he's probably used to, does that make him more susceptible to throw picks? I mean, if he threw 2 picks against the Bears last week in a game where I think his quarterback rating was 39, a ridiculously low rating, does that mean that the Pittsburgh defense will be able to get on top of this game pretty early? I think so. And for that reason, I think the Steelers might again come out with a victory here where Justin Fields leads in offense with scores roughly 20 points. Brian, when we're looking at this, I'm not quite sure whether we have to keep putting our trust in the Pittsburgh defense every single week. Surely at some point, somebody has to find a way to unlock them.
And I'm not entirely sure if it's the Colts team that can unlock them. I was reading some reports on the Colts and what they're being criticised in particular around is no in-game adjustments whatsoever, both offensively and defensively. Last week, no touchdown there. Williams has shown above and beyond the numbers you would expect. And they allowed him to do that continuously over the course of the game. There was other games where they didn't adjust defensively, like they won in Indianapolis, where they knew what LaFleur was trying to do. Sorry, they won in Green Bay, where LaFleur, they knew what their game plan was, which was try to run the ball then and out for the quarterback to run as well. And they never adjusted for the whole game. And the same on offense, like Shane Steichen, by all accounts, from reading some reports, they just not seem to, they're sticking to the particular game plan, no matter what the circumstances of the game. That's not fruitful in any NFL. We've seen how many times you see a head coach at halftime or defense coordinator and you say, in-game adjustments, and it turns things on its head in the second half. The Colts really haven't done that yet. And I was reading a nice piece this week around Mike Tomlin and this QB1 question that he's been asked of him is Justin Fields your QB1? And the Steelers beat writer said, the minute he says he's QB1, the next question is, you're QB1, you giving him a new contract next season? And then it's contract as opposed to Justin Fields' play on the pitch. Mike Tomlin's handling it perfectly. It's week to week where everybody really knows within the organization he is the quarterback, at least for this season. I've spoken with the Steelers in a situation where they're playing from behind, and they haven't really played from behind to a stage where then the offense has to take control of a game and see can they pull them back. I think this weekend might be that scenario. And I think the Colts might find a way to get a victory. I think the Colts might eke this one out. The line is reflective, like 2 points favorites, is it, Shane, with Quimmet? Like it's reflective of a tight game that everybody expects.
One point, not even 2.
1 point. I think the start of the 2 during the weekend has come in, so people are obviously swaying their money one way or the other. But for me, I think this is where the Steelers' unbeaten run ends. I think the Colts need this one really badly, in my opinion, to stay in the division with the Texans after, potentially Texans winning in AFC South clash at the same time on Sunday evening. So I'm going to go with the Colts. It doesn't fill me with confidence, but I think the Colts just have enough to get this one over the line.
Noel, what say you?
After watching Anthony Richardson last week, I think this Steelers team will be able to keep him in check. So I think the Steelers probably eke out a low scoring win.
We were talking about games there which have a very low favorite in terms of the spread, and this game between the Saints and the Falcons in Atlanta has the Saints coming in as 2 points favorite. And looking at this in the context of the race for the NFC South, it's week 4. Can we say that this is a huge game? I think we absolutely can. The Saints, of course, their first 2 games really came storming out with their high scoring. It stalled quite sharply against the Eagles last week. We're not quite sure what the fitness situation is with Derek Carr. Going up against a Falcons team who are 1-2, playing at home against their most hated rivals, and would really love to get a victory here. No, what could make the difference?
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating game. I'm actually really looking forward to this. I think there could be a few points in this. You mentioned the Saints and what a blistering start to the season they had. They just came out all guns blazing, and everything they did seemed to go over the end zone or into the end zone. And that was fun to watch. I mean, that's what you want in football. You just want lots of TDs and lots of fun. And Saints absolutely gave that. The Falcons started off a bit slow in week 1. There was a few question marks. Is there an issue there? What was kind of happening, and there was a few questions, but they have, look, Kirk Cousins is, we talked about Andy Dalton earlier on, he's an experienced vet, getting his 100 million week 1 was, you can write that off to, quarterback come from an injury at a new team. But again, the Falcons have a lot of weapons there, and Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, like these are players that can really affect the game. And if the quarterback gets it right and things get clicking, they can put up some points. And the Saints are the very same. Now, we look at the Saints last week, it comes to a bit of a grind and halt with the Eagles. They lose 15-12, and that's not the Saints we'd been seeing for the first 2 games. But I wonder, are they starting to kind of level off and find the limit of where they were? Because obviously week 1 and 2 is not sustainable for the Saints. They lose their centre, Eric McCoy, who can be a big loss now. Lucas Patrick could be going into centre, and that'll be something to watch out for if that has any sort of impact on the way this offense runs, because we know there were question marks coming in for the offensive line for the Saints, which, you know, didn't really hold up. The offensive line did its job, as the scores would suggest. But when you lose your center, someone like that, that can cause a bit of a problem now, to see how they shuffle about a bit and how they kind of react to it. So I think both teams are capable of putting up points. I think I'm going to give the Falcons the home field advantage, and I'm going to say the Falcons will get the win, and it will be a big win, because then it moves them up to 2-1 with the Saints, and it keeps that division close. And I think that division will be close in the long run. So I think the Falcons have enough maybe to just get a win in what should be an exciting game to watch.
Yeah, certainly. If this game ends with both the Falcons and the Saints being on 2-2, it really is a huge momentum swing in that division, especially when the Falcons will probably then lock their targets on to the Buccaneers. When I'm looking at this game, though, like, we talk a lot about quarterbacks. We talk about the fact that, yes, there's an injury to Derek Carr, even though in those 2 games he played, yes, his passing average in the first 2 games was 14 yards or something like that against the Cowboys and the Panthers. But he didn't have to attempt many passes because Alvin Kamara did most of the heavy lifting. Whereas the run game in both in terms of their Atlanta's ability to defend the run game and to run the run game themselves has been a little bit blunted, because the injury report has only just come out in the last 30 minutes, guys. And Bijan Robinson and Matthew Judon are both on that. Now, I think they did both train today in Atlanta. But the fact that they're carrying knocks, we're not quite sure what way they've been practicing. We're not quite sure what way they've been planning. And even just based on a couple of the results I've looked at from the Atlanta point of view of the last couple of games, yes, it was a close game against the Chiefs. Yes, it was a close game against the Falcons, or against the Eagles, sorry. But I just think that situationally, and especially when it comes to stop and run games in key third down situations, in key second and short situations, I just don't know how much I trust the Falcons to actually get the job done against the Saints team, who were obviously riding high in confidence. I think got knocked down pretty quickly by the Philadelphia defense last week. Showed the kind of Saints of old thing when they really let the game slip away from them, and the game that they really should have had a lockdown because of how bad the Philadelphia offense was playing in some of those situations. I think actually the expectation of playing at home with so many of those home fans who were expecting so much good actually might have gone away from them. So I think that the fact that the Saints are coming up to Atlanta, a team that had so many questions about it before the season began, considering their quarterback situation, I think the Saints can really go into this and use their level of planning, use the fact that I think they will have a better run game and they will defend the run better, to just work those key third down, fourth down, even second and short situations that will turn the tide a little bit in favor of the Saints. Am I saying that with a great degree of confidence? No, I really can't sort of confidently predict what way this game will go. But if I'm looking at this game now, I just think that there's a reason the Saints are coming into this as close favorites. It's those key situations where I think they will be better able to handle. Last week, I'm not saying it's an anomaly, they didn't handle it well. They will learn their lessons, and they're coming up against an opponent which they are well used to. Brian, who do you think will win this key matchup?
Yeah, I'll side with you, Shane. I think the Saints won't be fearing going into Atlanta. Bear in mind they went into Dallas and were so comprehensive. I think it actually suits them to get back on the road with just attack-minded offense. I think it's a high-scoring one, but I think the Saints come out on top.
I think we spoke a lot about the Eagles there in that matchup. I think we're going on to their next, to Philadelphia's next duel with an NFC South opponent. They're playing away to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, 2-point favorites, another close game expected here. I'm really not quite sure what to expect, considering that the Eagles, as I've mentioned before, I don't think have proven their ability to be planned well in a good light. I think Nick Sirianni is under a lot of pressure. Playing against Tampa Bay team who I think there's a lot expected from them, played excellent in the first two games of the season, but really fell off a cliff last week when it came to trying to stop whatever Bo Nix was able to throw at them. So no, there's a lot of unknowns going into this game. We're trying to see which team may be able to pat things back to normal quicker to see who'll be able to edge a victory here. Does the fact that it's in Tampa Bay help them? I know there's a lot of bad weather in Florida this week. I don't know if that affects things, but this really could be a close one. I'm not quite sure what could make the difference here now.
No, I'm with you in terms of this is one I look at as well. I find this with a couple of them. It's such a tight game to know where these teams are going to go. I mean, we look at the Bucks last weekend. Nobody saw that result coming. They didn't just lose. They got destroyed, like, which was something that you just could not see the Broncos doing. But they went there and they beat them. The Eagles win a tight game, obviously against the Saints we were just talking about there. But it was tight. And I look at this Eagles team, and it's so much better than the results are kind of showing, or than the performances have been shown. They've really been carried by Saquon Barkley at the moment. But I don't know, and I don't know if I'm going to pay for it, but I keep kind of looking at this Eagles roster and thinking they are so talented. They have so many good players there that if they do get it right, they're a team that can cause other teams problems. And I think the Eagles are a better team than the Bucks if everything kind of clicks. So for that reason, I'm going to go to the Eagles again, because I think it will click at some point. I know there are question marks with the head coach. We look at how the season ended last year, and maybe I'm just kind of not hoping, because I'm not an Eagles fan, but I'm just kind of guessing that these players will click. They'll click. Maybe they won't. Maybe there is a systemic issue there with the head coach, which is just going to stop, or something else behind the scenes, which is going to kind of prevent that from happening. But I look at this Eagles team. I think they have too many good players they're not the team for me that ended last season. And I think when they get it going, they can be a really good team. And I think they will be stronger than the Bucks this week. But if it doesn't happen, the Bucks definitely have the players to take the Eagles and to beat them. But I just think it won't be this weekend. I think the Eagles will do enough.
Sorry, Brian, just a quick key one before I let you go. Just in terms of stats. I mean, we're all talking about Baker Mayfield and the fact he obviously seems very comfortable in Tampa Bay. But it's worth mentioning that in the last two games, the total amount of offense that Tampa Bay have been able to muster has been 216 yards against the Lions. They ended up winning that one. And just over 220 yards against the Broncos in a game that they lost. So maybe things aren't as good as they seem on the offensive side of the ball in terms of how the passing offense can really gain, in particular, yards after catch.
I would agree with that. I don't think the Bucks are hitting the ground running. I thought the performance and the victory in Detroit, whilst everyone was raving about the fact that they'd gained their revenge on the divisional round loss in the playoffs last year, we touched on that Monday recap around the fact that Goff had to throw it 53 times. They got away. The Lions, for me, scuppered their game plan, which allowed the Bucks to get over the line. This, for me, comes down to the injury situation as opposed to who's the most talented team. It looks like A.J. Brown is out. It looks like Devontae Smith is going to be out. Lane Johnson looks like he's going to be out. And Vita Vea, if he plays, which again is another flight risk because we're not sure where at this time of recording of this broadcast whether he's going to play. But if he does play, and he's going to go up against the replacement Lane Johnson, I think he'll have a fruitful day, and that will lead to Jalen Hurts struggling. Jalen Hurts hasn't played at the level in which we've seen over the course of the last 2 years. I think they got out of jail last week because the nature of Saquon Barkley and a 65-yard rushing touchdown, and then the big play to Goddard. There was two effectively big, huge plays in that game that turned it in the favour of the Eagles for me. These injury concerns to me are too much for the Eagles, and if that's the case on Sunday, I think the Bucks will get back on the winning track. But I don't think it'd be pretty. But I think it'd be a close one. And if it was all things equal and everyone was available, I'd be siding with the Eagles. But I'll go with the Bucks to pull off the victory on Sunday.
Yeah, I also think the Buccaneers will have just enough to get this one over the line. That is the end of our second segment here. Please stay with us as we will continue to preview the 9 o'clock games on week 4 Sunday. Hello, welcome into our third segment of the Irish NFL Show's Week 4 preview. We are starting with the first game that certainly comes to my mind when it comes to this 9 o'clock slate, and that is the matchup between the New England Patriots and the San Francisco 49ers, which, shock horror, has the biggest spread of the weekend. The 49ers are 10-point favorites at home against the New England Patriots team, who could only score 3 points against the New York Jets. Is anybody surprised? No. Okay. Before I sort of defer to Noel and Brian in this, I'm going to make just a quick case as to why the Patriots might actually shock people here, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, because the big thing which held them back in the second half of the Seahawks game and against the Jets was the fact that the defense quite clearly, and the offensive line as well, which aren't very good at pass protecting, but quite good on the run, obviously got very fatigued. And I think they were just too tired going into Thursday Night Football. I'm not quite sure whether there's something really needs to be changed with the training regime in New England. That I don't think their strength and conditioning is good enough. I don't think their the amount of energy to bring into games is good enough. Their stamina clearly isn't good enough, because in that game against the Seahawks, it's not like the defense is on for twice as many snaps as the offense was. It's not like it was last year when the offense kept throwing the ball away. That hasn't been happening. Jacoby Brissett hasn't been giving the ball away cheaply, hasn't been letting in too many turnovers. I was just surprised at how quickly the Patriots seemed to fade it off and gave the wide receivers, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the Jets had 8 receivers who managed to make catches against the Seahawks. There were 2 wide receivers who got 100 plus yards. If you give receivers room, by God, they will use it. But I think that the Patriots might come into this game, particularly in the first half, because they've had the extra 3 days, because they'll have a bit of preparation. It's a bit later in the day. I know they have to travel to the West Coast. I just think they might have a bit more energy than we think they will to stick it up to a 49ers team who are in a little bit of pressure now after dropping to 1-2 from completely blowing their lead in Los Angeles. So I think there is a good chance that the Patriots defense might be able to keep things locked down more than we think. Will Jacoby Brissett then score a touchdown? No, absolutely not. Am I expecting Ramondre Stevenson and the run game in New England to get things going against this San Francisco defense? No, absolutely not. The 10-point spread is probably fair in that I think the 49ers might win this game 17-7 or 13-3. Who knows? We might have a bit of a West Coast shootout. Maybe the nice weather might, and a bit of extra planning might get Jacoby Brissett playing a bit better. But I don't see the Patriots come away from this with a victory. But I think they will. There won't be as much of a walkover as people may be expecting after what happened in MetLife, or in JetLife, I should really be saying, a couple of weeks ago. No, you're not looking at this from an East Coast point of view. Do you think I'm wrong in that there might be a shock here? Because obviously the 49ers really need to bounce back. They need a victory here, and they need it bad. And I think I think there's many people who are expecting them to go out and get it.
Yeah, and obviously we talked about teams earlier like the Bengals, who kind of coming in absolutely need victories. I mean, the San Francisco aren't in that boat as bad as the Bengals, but they do need a victory. Obviously, they're carrying a few injuries, so this is something you kind of watch, see who's going to be available and who's not. But again, I think this San Francisco team is a really, really talented football team. I think Brock Purdy has looked good so far this season, even if the results haven't always gone the way they'd wanted. And I just look at from top to bottom. I think Jordan Mason has come in and been a very good replacement for McCaffrey. Obviously, he's not McCaffrey. He never will be. But still, he's a player who's come in and been very, very productive and done what he needed to do to get the 49ers going at times. Now, last weekend was such a strange one for them to give up that lead to the Rams. I mean, probably 7 times out of 10, they win that game. It's just whatever it was last week is what happened. And I don't think New England are going to be strong enough to come in and actually get the win. I think the defense can be good for New England, and I think it can definitely slow down the San Francisco 49ers to a point, and they might not get that 10-point win, but I still think the 49ers are just a stronger team. And you said it yourself, Shane, they've had a couple of dodgy results and they really need to get back to winning ways, or there will be questions asked in San Francisco. And I think this weekend they'll have enough to get that win.
So just a quick aside before I move on to Brian. This game is being covered by Fox. Why isn't Tom Brady covering this one? Huh? It's San Francisco's hometown, playing against the Patriots. Come on, Fox. You're putting Greg Olson on this, who is quite clearly the better commentator. But come on.
He's been assigned to his former team in which he won a Super Bowl for this. He's doing the Bucs-Eagles game on Sunday, Shane, which people would argue is much more appealing than this game, because unfortunately for you, Shane, this is blowout territory on Sunday. I'm sorry. I love your thought process. We all do it with our team every week. We try to fit the glove or fit the narrative as to how our team can slow the other team down. Noel touched on it there. Brock Purdy, he was fantastic last weekend. He took this team on his shoulders, bearing in mind the nature of the injuries that they have. And we question whether he's got all these players around him, and that's why he's such a good quarterback. Well, I think last Sunday, again, he proved that he's a stellar quarterback in the league, whether he has these players available to him or not. And the contract is in the offing at some stage. I think that doing come to me on Sunday. The biggest storyline actually going into this game, because it's kind of come out in the last hour once we've been recording, is that, and it probably doesn't come as a surprise because we've discussed it within our group, bearing in mind the nature of the injury, it looks like McCaffrey's trip to Germany hasn't been successful in terms of the expectations. It looks like they're chowing on another 2 to 3 months on top of the existing injury, which kind of starts to put you into a territory. Will he play at all this season? But right now, Mason's stepping up. But the bigger question is, can they do it without McCaffrey over the longevity of a season? I'm not entirely sure they can. But for Sunday, I think they'll be fine.
I think they'll be fine. Yeah, that's a lovely way of putting it. Do you know what? They could stick on just give the boot to some fella in the crowd, and do you know what? With that offensive line, they actually might get a couple of yards, which I guess might be fair. Who knows? Maybe I'm just engaging in the ancient sport of Yera in the typical Kerry style, as is often the case in Quincy on the South Shore of Massachusetts. Moving on now to a battle between the Washington Commanders and the Arizona Cardinals, two teams who have young quarterbacks who are good on their feet, two teams who I think have pulled off a couple of surprising results. The Commanders are obviously coming off a kind of a nice victory on Monday Night Football. The Cardinals, I think, can probably feel a bit shortchanged for how things ended up against Detroit last week. I'm not saying Detroit didn't deserve the victory, but I think we were saying here on Monday night that there was a couple of calls probably didn't go their way. The last time the Cardinals played at home, a couple of weeks ago, the Cardinals played at home against the Rams. The Marvin Harrison Jr. exploded, Kyler Murray exploded, and if they get on top early, they can be difficult to bring back down again. So, Brian, will that be the case here?
Well, I got caught up in that victory last week because I suggested that they'd run the table and win their second home game last week against the Lions, and it wasn't to be. We went back to that kind of level of, I suppose, just where you are in terms of your weight level in the NFL, and the Cardinals are just not there yet in terms of playing against the bigger teams. In this instance, I think we're in a situation last week. I got carried away by the Cardinals off the back of the win against the Rams, and people, for me, as good as the result it was on Monday Night Football for the Washington Commanders, and everybody all of a sudden is raving about Jayden Daniels. I've even seen some bizarre stories this week that he should have been the first pick of the draft as opposed to Caleb Williams. People need to pump the brakes on both sides. Like, Kieran is very good at this stuff because he covers it more than us, and he was saying everyone needs to pump the brakes on Caleb Williams in terms of how he's playing, but they really do need to pump the brakes on Jayden Daniels. It was a fantastic performance on Monday. And then all of a sudden, the people are suggesting that why aren't the Commanders even favourites going into this game? Because the Commanders over the last 10 years haven't been a really good organisation or team, and I think people are getting carried away. I think this is a game that probably will suit the Cardinals. I think Cardinals, for me, will come out on top of this game. I think Jayden Daniels might have a serviceable game and play quite well, but I think they strike me as that kind of erratic team. They'll play well, but they'll still find ways to lose. And as well as it was on Monday in terms of a great road victory, I think this weekend they'll come unstuck, and I think the Cardinals win.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you look at the way that Jayden Daniels performed, and again, this is prime time against a big opponent. You know, he
great performance, Shane. Sorry, great performance. I'm not doubting the performance. I just think people, it's 3 weeks in, are getting carried away in suggesting he should have been the number 1 pick last April.
Oh, I'm not suggesting. Yeah, but he was the number 2 pick for reasons. Is still, regardless of the fact that Caleb Williams is the quite obvious number 1 pick from even before last year's college season started. I mean, out of the 23 passes he attempted, he completed 21 of them. Managed to show himself to be a dual threat. Got things over. Managed to run in a touchdown, pass in for 2. You know, I think there's a reason why there's a lot of hype behind Jayden Daniels. That said, though, I am picking the Cardinals to win. It's for a simple reason that I don't trust the Commanders' defense. I know they let in 33 points against the Bengals, and there's no real shame in that. But when you think about organizationally and there's a difference between winning and winning consistently. I don't see this Commanders defense being a winning defense consistently in any facet in terms of being able to pass rush. I know Bobby Wagner did manage to make a lot of good tackles. There was a couple of players managed to get a couple of sacks as well on Joe Burrow, and that offensive line is decent enough. But against the Cardinals team where Kyler Murray will not be sackable in the fact that, as we've alluded to before, his nature of play is very unpredictable. I won't use the word chaotic. It is unpredictable, though, and it's very difficult to plan for. I just don't think that they will be able to properly account for it. Plus the fact that the Cardinals aren't coming into this with one passing objective, with one person that Kyler Murray can throw to. Like, it's not a case of the quarterback with favorite receiver. It's quarterback with favorite pair of feet. Quarterback with James Conner, who is a very, very capable running back, particularly in key situations. Quarterback with a lot of receivers that you can throw to. I think the Cardinals have a very good chance of being able to score early in this game. I'm not doubting Jayden Daniels' ability for a second. I think I'm expecting actually another good game from Jayden Daniels. I don't think he will show inconsistency. It's the Washington defense I don't trust to stand up against Kyler Murray in a way that the Detroit defense really managed to keep a lid on things last week. No, do you have the same kind of confidence in Kyler Murray to be able to unpick whatever the Commanders throw at them?
When it comes to Kyler Murray, to be honest, I think he can be quite hit and miss. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in there now has started to show the hype was real when it comes to this kid. And when we look at Jaden Daniels, I mean, what a great game the other night. But I want to see more from the 49ers. I want to see more to kind of trust them. And I think traveling to the Cardinals, I just think the Cardinals probably will have a little bit too much. So I think the Cardinals will take that win.
Moving on to Cleveland Browns at Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders coming off quite a shocking victory or defeat against the Carolina Panthers last week, even though they managed to go to Baltimore and come away with a 3-point win against the Ravens the week previous. Playing against a Browns team who I think very few of us really know what to expect from them. The Raiders coming into this as 2-point favorites. I think it's probably fair considering they're the home team. I think their pass rush might be able to close down Max Crosby early enough. But that said, that Browns defense might be able to shut down whenever Gardner Minshew and co. Throw at them. This has the potential to be not a high-scoring close game, but a close game nonetheless. Can't hear you there, no. Sorry about that.
It does look like one of these games. It's two teams I just don't trust. I don't know what you're getting out of Cleveland Browns. You mentioned the Raiders. One week they're beating the Ravens. The next week they're losing to the Panthers, who, you know, at one point we all questioned if the Panthers would even get a win this season. But I look at the Browns team, and I have no confidence in that offense whatsoever. They're obviously carrying a few injuries in terms of Njoku. They have some O-linemen who have been carrying injuries. So for me, I don't worry about that offense. And looking at the defense, I see Myles Garrett is carrying an injury. I don't know if there's any confirmation of whether he's going to make it or not for the weekend. But if he doesn't make it, that is a very big loss. But I just think something isn't right with the Browns. I mean, I went for them last week over the Giants, but I didn't have a huge kind of confidence in them. But the Giants obviously went and beat them. And I don't have much confidence in this Browns team at all. Just something there just doesn't feel right for them. The Raiders, again, what do you get from them? The team that beats the Ravens or the teams that lose to the Panthers? But I just think they will probably have enough on offense. Now, I wonder if there's going to be a QB controversy there, because obviously Gardner Minshew starts. He comes out, they bring in Aidan O'Connell, who throws a touchdown when he comes in. So it'll be interesting to see there. But I think maybe the Raiders will probably have enough. Like, this isn't going to be a great game. It'll be a close one. Who knows what way? But I just think the Raiders will probably take it.
Yeah, I also think the Raiders will take this, I think, for one quick reason, that the Raiders play for their coach. And I'm not quite sure who or what the Cleveland Browns play for. I mean, I kind of watched relatively closely the game last week between the Browns and the Giants. You know, one big thing as well, the fact that Deshaun Watson managed to get sacked 7 times by that Giants defense. Kudos to the Giants defense. But I think the Raiders defense, with all of their great kind of pass rushers, Max Crosby and his kind of motley crew, I think that they've really shown the way that if you just pressure Deshaun Watson, go up, try to get in Cleveland's face, I don't think they will bite back to you. In terms of a quarterback controversy in Las Vegas, I'm not expecting that to happen. I think Gardner Minshew maybe had a bit of an off day. He threw that interception quite early on against the Panthers. You know, I'm not expecting any big hullabaloo about that. I think that the Raiders to come in for this and just have more motivation to go and get a decent victory in this. But Brian, I guess you were watching that game that Cleveland played last week by virtue of the fact they were playing against the Giants. You know, is there any kind of, myself and Noel have backed the Raiders to, I guess, maybe put things right in on their season, on their form after dropping to the Panthers? Is there any reason that the Browns can maybe put up a fight? On mute there, Brian. Sorry.
The mute thing is tracking well for both of us here, Stephen. There is, if their defense plays consistently well for the 4 quarters. We haven't seen that from them. You know, well, maybe with the exception of week 2, but we probably put that down more so to the poor performance of the Jags. You did the Giants of the service, Shane. It was actually 8 sacks, not the 7. I would say these two are the most dysfunctioning teams in the league right now, because we're saying everybody's playing for Antonio Pierce, but Antonio Pierce has to come out on Monday and say players are making business decisions and putting out tackles in the game, and that's going to get corrected quickly, as in they won't be on the field. And then he suggested he might even bring Aidan O'Connell in to start this game. I think he obviously shouldn't light the fire on the Gardner Minshew, but to me that strikes me as a guy that's not totally convinced by the quarterback he has at hand. And I'll go Raiders, but genuinely, this is the game of the weekend where if the Browns win, I don't think we're going to be walking away from this saying the Browns season is going to quickly evolve and start turning around again. I think there's huge problems there because of the quarterback and the fact that it's very evident even in the play. Some of the players are not bought into Deshaun Watson for various different reasons, never mind the off-the-field antics. And for the Raiders, I'm not convinced everybody's buying into the Antonio Pierce way of coaching. So I'll go Browns, but I'm not convinced by it. But I think we're all in that same kind of situation. Which team of the two do we think can eke out the victory more? I think Max Crosby and Watkins might get the Deshaun Watson, who just clearly can't understand to get rid of the ball. 6 sacks against the Cowboys, 8 sacks last weekend. That's telling. I think the Raiders defense will get them.
Well, moving on to a game which I think is more exciting, which is the Kansas City Chiefs at the Los Angeles Chargers. This was the game that Harbaugh was brought in to win. Noel, can he do it?
This weekend, he can't. No, look, this Chargers are a work in progress. Obviously, they've just, Jim Harbaugh has come in and, you know, he's just starting to build this team up. They've gone to a more run-heavy game to try and get results, but they don't have enough there for me. You look at Justin Herbert had the injury last weekend. Even if he plays this weekend, is he 100%? Do you want to even risk him, you know, this weekend? If he's not, Joe Alt gets an injury, Joey Bosa's carrying an injury, Khalil Mack. I mean, it just feels like this Chargers team now at the moment are just going under a little bit of pressure with players who are picking up injuries. Even if they make it at the weekend or not, are they 100%? And you're going up against the best team in the NFL, you know, the champions over the last couple of seasons, who have potentially the best quarterback to ever play the game, and a head coach like Andy Reid who can, you know, put him in positions to win all day long. No, this one is a blowout for me all over. I think the Chiefs are a much better team than the Chargers, even if the Chargers were fully fit. But it's questionable to see if they will be or not. And I think this is a bridge too far. But I think the Chargers have been going in the right direction. But again, it's the very start of this build-up, you know, and that's going to take time. So not this weekend.
Brian, every game that the Chiefs have played so far this season, it's been a close game. They've come on the right side of it. And considering the Chargers defense, generally speaking, has probably shown you know, that they are still a force to be reckoned with. Is there a possibility where if things come close later into the fourth quarter that the Chargers might have a chance?
Yeah, in a way, if Harbaugh can outcoach Andy Reid, and more so can he outcoach Spagnuolo, I'm not convinced he can. I think we touched on Monday's review show the stellar job that Spagnuolo does in these games defensively. We rave about Mahomes. Noel's right, he's the best quarterback probably we've seen for quite some time. We rave about Andy Reid, and we rave about all the offensive players, and Morty and Pacheco, obviously he's on IR. But the defense, for me, Spagnuolo just does time and time again. In these games, he just finds ways to eke out the victories. I said on Monday's show, I thought they should have just withheld Justin Herbert from the game last weekend. I thought it was always going to be a tight game. And Taylor Heineke, who was brought in as his backup recently, he's the kind of quarterback that I think Harbaugh can get the best out of. He's the type of guy, put your head in the line, he'll throw it, he'll make a run, he'll get outside the perimeter, he'll put his body in the line, and that's what Harbaugh wants in a quarterback. Not necessarily he's going to step in from Justin Herbert, but he'll feel comfortable with him as his backup. But no one touched on Joe Alt as an injury. Rashawn Slater now is injured. He may not play on Sunday. Their identity is a running team. We've seen that in week 1 in the big win against the Raiders. We saw that down in Carolina. Dobbins, Edwards. And with those two guys out, they're going to struggle for me to run the ball. And if Justin Herbert plays, as Noel said, is he 100%? Doesn't look like he is. This is a Chiefs victory. This game could have been a tight one, but because of the nature of how Harbaugh has gone about the approach over the course of the last week with players 50-50 and playing them, I think this leads to a Chiefs team that will be a little bit more comfortable this week as opposed to what we saw on Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Harbaugh leans on his staff, but I'm leaning on the staff that is on the Chiefs side of the ball. I think the Chiefs will get a pretty big win in this one and in front of a lot of Chiefs fans in SoFi Stadium. Well, guys, we've run 90 yards in this show so far. We are first and goal. There's one more game to finish off before we finally get to the end zone. That is Sunday Night Football between the Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens. The Buffalo Bills playbook in terms of how every season goes in the Josh Allen era at this time of year suggests that they're going to find this game more difficult than I think that many people imagine. We even saw it last year when they got this big win against, you know, the Florida foldaways, which is as they did in the last 2 weeks, they easily put away the Dolphins and the Jaguars, two bad teams, it must be said. You know, and they're coming in now into Baltimore, a Ravens team who really need a victory. The other Harbaugh, who I think will have a pretty good game plan. And if you look at the way that Bills seasons go, they generally hit a point at this stage of the year where they're coming with confidence, they're coming with swagger. They've shown themselves to still be up there with the Mahomes and the Chiefs in the AFC race, but somebody manages to peg them down. But then you look at the Ravens and what is their game plan? What way does their games generally go? Generally speaking, move up in the first half, find a way to either bottle it or nearly bottle it late on. They nearly did it last week against the Cowboys. So which one of those two is really going to prevail? You know, if the Ravens, considering their penchant for throwing away leads or letting other teams back into the game in the fourth quarter, is that the environment that Josh Allen can thrive in? It is, in fairness. But is it going to happen this week? No. I think that the Ravens have enough in this to not only get a win, but to lock things down from early enough. So I don't know what you guys think, Brian. I think it's a big game for both of them. Baltimore probably need to win more than Buffalo, considering how their divisions are falling up. But still, there's a lot of pride at stake here in prime time.
Yeah, I agree with you on that remark. That the Ravens need us more than the Bills. And I said earlier on the show, the Rams and Bears was a toss-up type of game. This feels like that as well. The Bills' defense in the first game, you know, in the first half, maybe the first 2.5 quarters, were struggling. They allowed Kyler Murray to go up and down the field on him. He was out in the perimeter. He was using his legs. He was throwing the ball. He was accurate. They couldn't stop him. They allowed the Cardinals to get a bit of a jump on the lead. And they're going to play a similar quarterback to Lamar Jackson, who can do everything. Let's be fair. He can do everything in the right time and the right approach, whether it's running the ball effectively. Saw last Sunday when he needed to put, as Colin used to say, put it up the jumper and run it and get the first down. The Bills defense for me didn't really get tested in Miami. It certainly didn't get tested on Monday. I think this is the biggest test they're going to have to date, and I'm not entirely sure whether they can pass it. I think this is going to come down to Derrick Henry, because we saw last week they finally got around to actually utilising one of the marquee players that they brought in this season. I think that will, provide the Ravens with a security, allowing Lamar to do other stuff and allow him to get other players open in the field. And I think it'll come down to the fourth quarter. I think it's an explosive, high-scoring game. But I'm going to side with the Ravens. Like, they're not even favourites going into a game at home. Lamar Jackson seems to always find ways to win the games when he's not expected to. It's only a 2-point swing. Like, yeah, it's not a huge underdog. But in this instance, people will probably jump on the Bills thinking they're 4-0. It's a given. It's a formality because of the way Josh Allen's playing. Not necessarily. I think the Ravens get over the line in this one.
No. Sunday night football, if we're waiting all day for Sunday night, Brian has predicted that it's going to be a high-scoring classic, which obviously wasn't the case when the Bills played in primetime last time. I think the Ravens are obviously a much better opponent than the Jacksonville Jaguars. Ravens are, do you see this as being a Bills victory, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm with Brian in terms of this game being a 50-50 toss-up for me, but I am actually going to go with the Bills. I'm going to go with Josh Allen. I think he's been phenomenal this season. I mean, we talk about Patrick Mahomes potentially being one of the best or the best quarterback in history. I think this season, Josh Allen is the best player in the NFL so far. I think he's been phenomenal. Even if you look at his stats, I mean, his passing stats, he's not zeroing in on one player. He has 6, 7, 8, 9 different players who are receiving the ball in each game. I like what the Bills are doing. I like the Ravens. I still think they're a really good team. If they get the win, I'm certainly not going to be shocked by it. Brian mentions Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson. Those guys can trouble anyone. But I'm just going with the form of Josh Allen at the moment, because I think I'm surprised by the Bills. I thought they would make the playoffs, but I thought they had made so many changes in the offseason that it might be a bit slow starting, and they may need to kind of get it into gear as they went along. But look, they're doing what they need to do. Josh Allen is flying through teams and they're getting the wins. So for me, I think the Bills will take this one.
Well, that's our lot for this week for our preview of Week 4 NFL Sunday. Thank you very much for watching us live on X, YouTube, and Twitch if you are following us, or for listening to us on podcasts and other podcast platforms. For those who are interested in previewing the Monday Night Football doubleheader this week, We'll have a podcast at lunchtime on Monday previewing Titans at Dolphins, the loser of which will be the subject of my rant this time next week. There are two teams who I've been dying to kick, but unfortunately haven't had the chance. And Seahawks and Lions, who I think are two teams who are excellent, and I'll be interested to hear what people think in terms of who might be able to find their way to win that one. But for now, thank you very much. We are back on Monday at 9 p.m. to recap all the main talking points of Sunday, and keep an eye out for our instant reaction podcast, which will go online roughly about 2 a.m. just in time. So whatever time you do your Monday morning commute, it will be there for you. But for now, thank you very much for listening to the Irish NFL Show.